Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be sharing this time with you again this morning. Thanks to Nick for doing that welcome and intro for us earlier. I hope you'll manage to catch all of that. There's some really important, useful notices and things to think about. And thanks for the Williams for doing that brilliant video. Lovely to catch up with them and see what they've been up to during lockdown. So on with today's message. So today I'm doing a message called The Way to Bethel. Last week we sort of dipped into Exodus for our passage, but prior to that we've been spending quite a lot of time in Genesis, which has been great, following the story of Abraham and his son Isaac, and the story with Hagar and Ishmael and all that sort of stuff as well. So I want to go back there and pick up the story a little bit more today. So sort of following on the story, jumping ahead in the story of Abraham and Isaac. Last time we really looked at Isaac. It was the story of when God apparently asked Abraham to sacrifice him, and the story is called the binding of Isaac. So we had a look at that, and obviously Isaac also cropped up in the story of Hagar a little bit. Well, now we sort of fast forward, and the thing I want to talk about today is some years later now. Now Isaac is now married to Rebecca, and in Genesis 25 we read about how she became pregnant with twin sons, Esau and Jacob. And this is another story in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible, about contending brothers. And actually, when you read through the Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, you often get these themes that are coming up again and again, very sort of deep themes that speak to very sort of essential parts of the human condition. And the theme of the contending brothers comes up a few times. I mean, the first time we see it is with Cain and Abel. And now again we have it with Jacob and Esau. And they are struggling against one another from the very beginning, when they're in the womb, as it happens. Rebecca is aware of these 2 babies in her womb struggling together, and she seeks out God to wonder why and ask why, and she receives this word that says that there are 2 nations struggling in your womb, and that the older will serve the younger, that the younger will have authority over the older, which is a reversal. So again we have this turning upside down of the expectations of the narrative. There's this twist on expectations, this conflict from the very start. When they're born, Esau is born first. Esau comes out first, but Jacob is just after, and Jacob is clutching onto his heel. It's almost like they're wrestling for who's going to have the first place from the very beginning. And so these brothers that are born, these contending souls, these contending nations in embryonic form, they are both quite flawed characters, actually. And they're also polar opposites. So you've got Esau. Esau he's a man's man. There are different, in the Hebrew, there are different plays on words, kind of puns around the idea that he's red and hairy. Makes me think of Brian Blessed. Imagine a baby Brian Blessed. I don't know why that just came to my mind. So Esau, he's red, he's hairy, he's a man's man. It says that he's a skillful hunter and a man of the field. So he's outdoorsy, hunting, shooting, fishing. He's that kind of guy. He's sporty. He's manly. But he's also kind of, as the story unfolds, we get this sense that he's a bit brutish, a bit uncouth, a little bit unthinking. He's certainly not the sort of man that we'd expect to find product in his hair. He's not a cardigan wearing man. He's not perhaps in touch with his sensitive side, we might say. He's that kind of guy. But he's Isaac's favourite. This man's man. He's Isaac's favourite. And Jacob is the polar opposite. It says that Jacob, he's a quiet man who living in tents. So he likes to stay home. He's a more sort of homebody. He likes to stay home and cook with his mum. He's a bit mumsy, to be honest. We might say, imagining here a little bit, has he got a little bit more of an artistic temperament? little bit more that way inclined, but certainly he's more calculating. If Esau is unthinking, Jacob is the polar opposite. Jacob's thinking. Jacob's working it out all the time. He's quite calculating. In fact, he's pretty devious. But he's Rebecca's favourite. So we've got this contention between the brothers mirrored in a kind of rivalry between the parents and the parents' favourites. And there are a couple of stories which are really foundational to understanding this developing relationship and what I want to kind of get into today. The first thing that happens, the first story we read about, is that Esau's been out one day and he comes back and he's famished. And he's so hungry and there's Jacob with this stew. And Esau says, "Can I have some of your stew?" And so it seems, quick as a flash, Jacob turns around and goes, "Okay, I'll sell you some of my stew for your birthright." What? Where did that come from? So he's going to try and swap Esau's birthright. That means the privileges of being firstborn for some stew. And Esau kind of says, "Well, what good's a birthright to me? I'm going to die of hunger at this rate." So he agrees and he swears to give Jacob his birthright, his rights as the firstborn. Which is a bit mad, really. And it says in Scripture that thus Esau despised his birthright, and you can agree it's a pretty dumb thing to do. Why would he do that? Well, maybe Esau didn't really take his destiny, his place within this grand unfolding story, which is what we're reading about as we go through the first 5 books of the Bible. This emerging story of God's people, and there was a role, there was a blessing, there was a part to be played, and Esau apparently didn't seem to take his role in that seriously. And there's a lesson for us in that. And I also think there's a broader lesson here about trading away the future for a short-term gain. And I think that's a really serious thing that we need to be painfully aware of in our lives. Are we apt to go for the short-term gain at the expense of the long-term benefit? We see it all the time in our political discourse, I think, where you have politicians who are maybe thinking just 4 or 5 years ahead. What do I need to do to get re-elected in 4 years or 5 years? And that's as far ahead. What decisions are going to poll well? What decisions are going to be popular in the next round of elections just a couple of years ahead, when actually the problems that face our world need thinking that is 50 years ahead, 100 years ahead, 200 years ahead. We need the crises that face our planet and us as a species require us to have long-term thinking, not that kind of short-termism. And it's a perennial temptation of the human condition that we would focus on the short-term gain. And we get it right here in this very early story of Esau. Just focus right now. What satisfies me right now? What do I need right now? Do you ever find yourself kind of getting caught in that sort of thinking? Well, what just feels good right now? What do I need right now? And we might then make really poor decisions that actually sacrifice the long-term well-being of us and potentially other people as well. So there's a very deep lesson in there. And we can say that Esau was pretty dumb to make that decision. But at the same time, you have to say, from Jacob's point of view, it's a pretty nasty trick. It's very manipulative to kind of take advantage of his brother when he's at a low point, when he's vulnerable. Jacob swoops right in there and takes full advantage of his brother's need and perhaps lack of wisdom as well. So that's the first story, very indicative of these two brothers. And then the next story happens. We read about it in chapter 27 of Genesis. Well worth checking out if you have time today or this week. And Isaac is now nearing death, and he's almost blind. He's very, very poor eyesight. And his plan is that he's going to give the blessing, the blessing that was given to his father Abraham. He now wants to hand it on to his son Esau. But before he does that, he says to Esau, "Go out and hunt me some of my favourite food, maybe some venison or something, and bring it back, and we're going to have a lovely meal, and then I'm going to give you my blessing." And Rebecca overhears this, and so she then conspires, while Esau is away, she conspires with Jacob to con Isaac, and they go and they kill a couple of kids from the herds that are there, and they goat kids, not child kids. Just to be really clear about that. A couple of goats they kill, and make some goat stew or kebabs or something like that. I don't know. Cook some food that Isaac likes. And then Jacob is disguised as Esau, so he puts on some of Esau's clothes, and they take the skin of these goat kids and wrap them around his arms so that his arms feel hairy like Esau's. And in he goes and says it's Esau here, and Isaac isn't sure. Isaac's not convinced to start with, and he's surprised to see him back so soon. And Jacob, quick as a flash, says, "Oh yeah, well God gave me success." Jacob is quite glib, quite ready to use God as part of his lie to con the old man. So this is not good stuff. So, oh yeah, God gave me success. I found the animals really quickly, and here's the food. And Isaac's not sure, but eventually, if you know the story, he is deceived, and he gives Jacob the blessing. And this blessing is first and foremost it's prosperity. But it's also authority over the family, that he will be the ruler over his brothers and sisters, and that also he will, in the terms of this Abrahamic destiny, this human story that stretches out over thousands of years, that Jacob, or the one with the blessing, will carry this family line, and this family line eventually ends up with Jesus, with the Messiah. So this is pretty important stuff. So Esau returns home, and he and Isaac work out what's happened, that Jacob has conned them. And Esau is absolutely grief-stricken. When you read that passage, it's quite moving. Esau is absolutely howling. He's so broken by the fact that the blessing has been given to Jacob and not to him. And he asks his father for another blessing. And it's really interesting that Isaac can't undo what has been done, even though this blessing was kind of extracted out of him under false pretenses. He stands by his words, and that's very interesting. I mean, if we were writing this story today, I don't think it would go this way, would it? We would be, oh well, we're used to thinking of words in legal language, in contractual language, and if you enter into a legal contract under false pretenses, then it usually makes that contract null and void. So we might say today, oh well, he lied to get the blessing, so I just revoke the blessing. I'll give the blessing to Esau instead. But there's a very different mindset here, which I think is powerful and something we really need to take on board. They don't have a legal contractual way of thinking about words. They have a covenantal mindset. And that means that when something is said, it is said, that their very being, that their identity is bound up with their words. And they recognise the power of words to shape reality. And that, again, is a very important lesson for us. How often do we use words casually, hurtfully? We use words too quickly. We say things and they can't be taken back. Words create worlds. Words create realities. And if we had that same covenantal mindset, we might be a lot more cautious before we blurted out things. If we accepted that actually once things are said, then reality is often shaped in that way. But anyway, Isaac does give Esau the blessing that he can give him. And actually, he prophesies that one day that Esau will throw off the yoke of Jacob, which comes up some way down later in Israel's story. But anyway, carrying on our story for the minute, Esau, naturally enough, is furious, and he plans to kill Jacob and makes no secret of the fact. And Rebecca gets wind of this, and between her and Isaac, they suggest that it would be a pretty good idea if Jacob made himself scarce. Maybe he should go and stay with her family back in Haran, where Abraham originally came from as well. And maybe he should basically get out of town, keep his head down, and understandably so. Maybe go back to her parents, her family, and maybe get himself a wife, and certainly keep his head down until hopefully Esau's anger has subsided. So Jacob sets off, essentially fleeing for his life. And that brings us to the passage I want to focus on today. But just before I start that, let's just review. Let's just see where we are with Jacob so far. What kind of character is Jacob like? He's a pretty reprehensible character. You know, he's conniving, he's manipulative, he's ruthless, he's deceptive, he's pretty glib about God. He doesn't really take God's involvement in their life very seriously. In a strange way, is this reassuring to you? It's reassuring to me. I identify with Jacob. I like Jacob. And I like the way that the Bible presents so many of the characters that later on are described as heroes of faith, but they are presented as they are. There's an unvarnished reality here. There's no airbrushing going on. And I think it makes it easier to identify with these people as human beings. The Bible narrative meets us as human beings in all our frailties, in all our weaknesses, and presents characters who are flawed much in the way that we are flawed. There isn't an attempt here to somehow spin things, to present this glossy reality. No, it is what it is, and the Bible narrative puts it there in front of us. But the story doesn't end there. It doesn't leave us there. There is also a challenge. There's a journey to go on with God. There is a challenge to grow and to grow up, and that's the beginning of that story for Jacob. I think that happens next in this passage I want to go through today. So we pick up the story in Genesis 28, verses 10 to 22. So Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder, or a stairway in other translations, set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid, and he said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. So essentially he's making it like an altar, and he's making a sacrifice. So this is a religious act. He called that place Bethel, the house of God. But the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. Break for a quick cup of tea. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit today about the idea of the quest, the idea of the hero's journey, if you like. And the hero's journey is a journey in which the character, the hero, is shaped. Usually they go on a journey, they go to dark places, they defeat evil, they discover treasures, and then the treasures that they have discovered they then bring home to share with the rest of the community. And this kind of archetype is a staple of so many of our myths and our stories. And you can think of everything from The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, so many stories of popular fiction. And true stories, but the stories that really resonate with us tend to have an element of this kind of hero's journey, this quest within them. And you might ask why. Is that just an interesting formula that happens to entertain us? And I don't think it's that. I think there is something in that shape, in that archetype of the quest, that speaks to the very deepest part of what it is to be a human, to go on the journey of life, to defeat problems, to face dangers and darkness, and thereby to gain the treasures that we actually need to grow in character, in wisdom and maturity. And there is a sense in this quest that we read about, this journey that Jacob sets out on, that he's kind of retracing Abraham's original journey in reverse. He's going back on that route. It's a journey of about 550 miles that he would have set out on. It's a long and arduous journey. And this was the journey that Abraham took to start off this story of this family. So there's a sense in which there's a callback here. He's reconnecting with this epic destiny that God has placed upon Abraham and his line. But if Jacob is going to be part of that story, if Jacob is going to take up his role in this destiny, then he needs to step up. He needs to develop the kind of character, the kind of personality, the kind of life skills that we would associate with the hero, the kind of wisdom and maturity that he's going to need to play a meaningful part in this story. And so this event kind of kicks off this part. So right, as we said, right up to now, Jacob's he's not been a great guy. And it's this event which really gives a new meaning to his journey. It begins his character transformation. And it's not an instant transformation. You might think about the message that I shared to start this series, the journey to Emmaus with Jesus and the disciples. That longer type of progression where it takes time to change, or time for revelation to kind of become apparent. But in this instance, the journey is transformed, and this what was an instance of him running away becomes a pilgrimage. It becomes a sacred journey, a spiritual quest. And we might say that on the way to Bethel, Jacob meets God. Jacob, if you want to put it like this, Jacob is confronted with ultimate truth. The veil is pulled back, and all the cozy, domestic, trivial nonsense and the things that he might have been wrapped up with, the way that he's been living his life to this point, that is stripped away, and he is faced with stark, eternal, cosmic truth and reality. Maybe that's why he's terrified. Maybe that's why he's afraid. This ladder, this stairway, it represents a glimpse into another realm, a bigger story, a bigger reality, which, up to this point he's been sleepwalking. He's not been aware of any of that. There are forces beyond Jacob's comprehension, and God is intimately involved with his creation. God is very present. He's doing something. And the God that he was so glib about and so casual about including in his lie is now right in Jacob's face. He's right there. He's very present. And Jacob apparently is part of this God's plans. That's a real wake-up call. And Jacob has to wake up. He has to start on this path of sorting himself out. He needs to wake up and smell the coffee. And going on this path will ultimately allow him to face both God and Esau again, and that's what we'll be talking about next time. And so often we can be in that same position. We can be so tunnel visioned and wrapped up in our own stuff, our own world, our own stuff. And especially we expect this of the young. This is especially something we expect of children. And normally we think of part of the passage to adulthood as being grasping this bigger reality of growing up in maturity. But it's by no means automatic, and very often the process is incomplete in us. People can struggle at any age to find themselves, to locate themselves in the grand story of what it is to be alive and to be a human being. They can struggle for meaning and for purpose. We tend to distract ourselves with petty things, with temporary things, with irrelevant things. We can act incredibly selfishly, just pleasing ourselves, as I was sort of sharing earlier, that sense of just being in the moment and pleasing ourselves, thinking short term. Or alternatively, we sink into nihilism, which is just the idea that nothing matters, nothing has any meaning, nothing is important, there is no purpose to life. Whether we do that implicitly or explicitly, we act as if nothing has any purpose. And that might sound like a very bleak way to live. People talk about nihilism as if it's bleak. It's actually a very easy way to live. It's actually a cowardly way to live. Because if nothing has any purpose, well then nothing matters. So nothing you do matters. You can carry on acting like a child, not taking any responsibility, and it really doesn't matter because nothing has any matter. So actually nihilism is an easy, cowardly way to live. But it's a disaster. It's a disaster for us as individuals. It's a disaster for the human condition to live in that way. Because we must take responsibility. That's what being made in the image of God means. We are Genesis 1 stuff. We are made to rule and to reign, to have a stewardship role in the ongoing act of creation. And to kind of welch on our responsibilities is disastrous for the entirety of creation, as we see so often in the news and what's going on in the planet. To not pay attention to issues of justice, to issues of creation care, is a disaster for us as human beings and for the creation that relies upon us as God's image bearers and stewards in his good creation. So we have to recognise that we have a part in the ongoing shaping of the world. We are playing a role. The question is simply, what is that role going to be? It's not if we're going to have an effect on the world. It's just, what is that role going to be? What is that effect going to be? Are we going to be moving the world and our lives and our communities ever more towards the kingdom of God? Or are we going to be allowing them to slide ever more towards the kingdoms of this world? That is the perennial challenge for us, for we, the people of God, who are called to be part of his kingdom, who are invited to become ambassadors for his kingdoms and to take up this ministry of reconciliation. So what does Jacob do? What are the lessons that we can perhaps learn from Jacob's response? Well, I've got a couple of points here. So the first thing that Jacob does in the face of this is that he wakes up. He gets up, he wakes up, and he recognises what's happened to him. He doesn't wave it away. He doesn't say, oh wow, I must have had some bad cheese last night. That was a really vivid dream. Anyway, on I go with my life. No, he takes what's happened really seriously. He owns it. He knows that he has encountered the living God. And perhaps following naturally from that, he gets scared. It says he's afraid. And, by this, I don't mean that it's a kind of godless, hopeless terror. It's a reverent awe. It's a godly fear. It's something that moves him. It's a reality and a seriousness that shakes him. He can't play dumb anymore. He's got to take this seriously, and he treats this experience with the seriousness that it demands and deserves. And the next thing is that he builds something. He takes this feeling, he takes this revelation that he's received, and straight away he does something concrete. He takes the stone that he was using as a pillow and he puts it upright. In his case, he builds an altar, as I said earlier. He does something. Now, is there something in our journey that we could do that is a concrete project, that is a physical manifestation, a physical expression, something that exists, that isn't just up in our heads, in our dreams or in our thoughts, but is a practical step that we can make to move our story forward, to take hold of the journey and the quest that God has given us, to take hold of the meaning and purpose that he's embedded in our lives? Can we make that concrete? Can we make that physically and practically expressed in some ways. Maybe it's a reminder, maybe it's something that's just going to bug you every day to remind you to act in a certain way. Maybe it's a list of goals, maybe it's some objectives that you're going to set yourselves with some time frames. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to measure myself against this list of objectives. Maybe you get into some sort of accountability relationship with it. Maybe you share these goals with someone else so that they can also become part of the journey. Because when you tell someone else, it becomes more real, doesn't it? Now you've got someone who might say, and how's that going? And have you done that yet? And, it becomes like a real thing. So maybe that's something we can do. We can do some practical step to take hold of the meaning and the purpose and the call that God has placed on our lives. What else does he do? He starts to make vows. He starts to put into words how this is going to work, how he understands his relationship with God to be, and what his response to that relationship is going to be. In other words, he makes a plan. He makes a promise. He has a statement of faith, if you like, but he articulates a plan, and he takes all these ideas and says, okay, and this is now what it's going to look like, and he articulates that. And finally, he restructures his resources around this plan. It says he commits to making a tithe. He commits to give 10% of everything that he receives to the God who he now realises is so intimately involved in his life. And in our journeys, in our quests, in our taking hold of the meaning and purpose that is embedded in our lives, we might want to articulate a really practical way that we are going to commit to pay a price, to make a sacrifice, to do something that is practical and measurable, to see this thing happen. Because most things require resources. If we want to see God's purposes in our lives come to fruition, it's going to take resources. It's going to take our stuff. It's going to take our time. Probably going to take some money. It's going to take other resources that we have. And that's how we get things done, by practically committing to it. So there's 5 things there, 5 ways that we see Jacob respond to this revelation of God and act in ways that are designed to see these things become realities in life, in his life, and also to see his character being transformed towards the person that God wants him to be. So, quick sip of tea, hang on. From this moment of epiphany, of revelation, Jacob sets out again. He continues his journey. And none of this, it's important to note, none of this means that journey is going to be easy, or it's going to be comfortable, or it's going to be straightforward. But again, we might reflect on the fact that there is very little in life that is gained without some struggle and with some perseverance. It doesn't mean that he's the finished article. As we shall see next week, and if you read through the whole of Jacob's story, he's still a pretty rough diamond. He still has some very questionable moments. But we can take from Jacob this very important truth, this very helpful, I think, metaphor and notion, just something perhaps to reflect on when you think, oh, what's my life about? Where's it all going? What am I doing here? This idea, this metaphor of the quest, of the hero's journey. Start to see your life in that way, as a journey, as a quest, as a setting out on a task to achieve something really important, to find the treasure of life, to be shaped as the hero of your life. And that is such an important part of being a human being, to move out beyond our comfort zones, to move out beyond self-serving, immature kind of agendas, and pursue something that is higher, something that is more foundational, something that is more true, and something that is eternal and cosmic in its scope. This last couple of weeks we've been confronted with so many things that are like that experience that Jacob had, reality confronting us in the face. maybe not our reality, but the reality for so many people. And I think there is a deep, deep challenge to us to wake up and to challenge ourselves to be the salt and light gospel people that we need to be. Not to act first and foremost out of our own agenda, out of our own comfort zone, over what makes me feel comfortable. Sometimes there are messages which can make us feel condemned, and instantly the thing is to push back against that and to justify, to mitigate, to water down, to give another narrative that seems to soften the blow somehow. Just be very aware, be very self-analytical and critical of strategies that we take to soften the blow for our own comfort. Are we ultimately on a quest that requires us to maximise our own comfort, or are we on a quest to be the image bearers of God in this world and to shine a light for his justice, his love and his kingdom? So may we this week take hold of that quest in our lives. May we have the veil stripped away from our eyes to see how God is very present, that angels are ascending and descending everywhere, that God is present and active in his world, and that we are called as his kingdom people to play a decisive, vital part in those plans. God bless you. Have a great week.